It was a moonless night on the winding country roads as Sarah drove her old pickup truck through the dense forest. The radio crackled with static, the only sound accompanying her in the desolate darkness. She was on her way to a cabin she had booked for a weekend getaway, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of the city. Little did she know that this night drive would turn into a chilling tale of horror. As she navigated the twisting roads, a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring her vision ahead. Sarah squinted, trying to make out the road through the mist when suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the truck skidded to a halt. Heart pounding, Sarah peered through the windshield, but the figure had vanished into the darkness. Shaken, she took a deep breath and continued on her journey, convincing herself it was just a trick of the fog. The cabin was nestled deep in the heart of the forest, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Sarah parked her truck and grabbed her bags, walking up the creaky wooden steps to the front door. She fumbled with the key, the silence of the night pressing in on her like a heavy weight. Inside, the cabin was musty and cold, the air thick with the scent of pine and decay. Sarah shivered, feeling a sense of unease creep over her. She lit a fire in the ancient stone fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. As the fire crackled, Sarah settled in for the night, trying to push aside the feeling of being watched. She brushed it off as her imagination running wild, but deep down, a primal fear gnawed at her insides. Hours passed, and the clock struck midnight, the chimes echoing through the silent cabin. Sarah tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the feeling of unease that clung to her like a fog. Just as she was on the brink of sleep, a sound pierced the silence, a faint tapping at the window. Heart hammering in her chest, Sarah sat up, her eyes wide with fear. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if someone, or something, was trying to get in. With trembling hands, she reached for the curtain and slowly pulled it back. To her horror, a pale face peered in through the window, its eyes black and soulless, a twisted smile stretching across its features. Sarah recoiled, a scream catching in her throat as the figure vanished into the night. Frantic, she grabbed her phone, fingers fumbling as she dialed 911. But as she held the phone to her ear, all she heard was static. No signal, no connection to the outside world. Panic bubbled up inside her like bile, the walls of the cabin closing in around her. Desperate for some semblance of safety, Sarah grabbed a kitchen knife, her only defense against the unknown terror lurking outside. She crept through the darkened cabin, every creak of the floorboards sending a jolt of fear through her veins. Just as she reached the front door, a voice whispered in her ear, a cold breath ghosting over her skin. "You can't escape, Sarah. We've been waiting for you." She whirled around, the knife clutched tightly in her hand, but there was nobody there. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows twisting and writhing like living things. With a sudden burst of courage, Sarah flung open the door, ready to face whatever horror awaited her outside. But to her disbelief, the fog had thickened, enveloping the cabin in a suffocating blanket of white. Lost and disoriented, Sarah stumbled into the forest, the trees looming over her like silent sentinels. She tried to call out for help, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. As she wandered deeper into the forest, a faint light flickered in the distance, drawing her like a moth to a flame. She followed the light, her heart pounding in her chest, until she reached a clearing bathed in an eerie glow. In the center of the clearing stood a dilapidated mansion, its windows shattered, ivy crawling up the crumbling walls. Sarah hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to run. But something drew her closer, an invisible force compelling her to step inside. The mansion was a labyrinth of decay and shadows, the air thick with the scent of mold and rot. Sarah moved deeper into the bowels of the house, the darkness swallowing her whole. At last, she reached a grand ballroom, the moonlight filtering in through the broken ceiling, casting a ghostly light on the desolate room. And there, in the center of the room, stood the pale figure from the window, its eyes fixed on her with a hunger that chilled her to the bone. "You've trespassed on our domain, Sarah," the figure hissed, its voice like a blade against her skin. "Now you must pay the price." Sarah's blood ran cold, her grip on the knife tightening. But before she could react, a chorus of whispers filled the room, a cacophony of voices from beyond the grave. With a deafening roar, the mansion collapsed around her, the walls crumbling to dust, the floor opening up beneath her feet. Sarah fell into the yawning abyss, the darkness swallowing her whole. When she awoke, she found herself back in her truck, parked by the side of the road. The sun was rising in the distance, the fog lifting to reveal the familiar landscape of the countryside. Shaken to her core, Sarah drove home in a daze. The memory of that night drive horror story burned into her mind like a brand. She tried to convince herself it was just a nightmare, a trick of the mind, but deep down, she knew the truth. She had crossed paths with something dark and malevolent, something that lurked in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. And she knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before it came for her once again.